Hello, I'm Anthony. Welcome back to the Xils Lab Xils 4 tutorial series, and an unusual episode today because what you can see here isn't an instrument, it's an effects unit. Xils 4 is going to act as an effects unit on the insert strip of another instrument track today. In fact, on a couple of tracks actually. I'm going to demonstrate its use on a drum beat, and I'm also going to demonstrate its use as an effects unit on a synthesizer instrument track. Hope you're enjoying this series so far, and if you are, please consider checking out the Patreon and YouTube channel member links below. That's an awesome way to help support my channel carry on making content like this. Okay, without further ado, let's get underway. I'm going to mute the effect just for starters so that we can hear the drum track on its own with no effects being applied. Really simple drum track that I'm going to get running in the background. Now I'm going to unmute this instance of the effects unit. I'll just show it to you actually before we go any further. Here it is, currently bypassed. Just a quick word before we go any further. This is a VST, this is the version 2, the VST2 version of the plugin. I know there was an issue with the VST3 version of Xils 4 being used as an effects unit. It wasn't accepting any audio input into its signal path. I know that that's been fixed, but I'm still using the version 2. They both work, but this just happens to be the VST2 version of the application. What I'm going to do is unmute it, press play again, and you'll hear complete silence. The reason for that, so the drum rhythm is now running in the background, but you can't hear it unless I bypass the instrument, because at the moment this plugin isn't allowing any audio through its signal path. We have a completely dedicated set of pins to handle its use as an audio effects unit. It's these in-FX channels. We've ignored these pins so far. And the first demonstration I'm going to make, because it's the simplest, is to tie input 1 to output 1 and input 2 to output 2. And there's our drum track back. Now at the moment it's acting as a straight bypass, so there's really no point it being here. We want to send it through the circuitry of the plugin. So let's disconnect them again. And this time I'll send it into the filter. And then out of the filter, off to the output. Quite clearly here that that's the filter operating on it now. But what I really want to spend the majority of today talking about is the input tab in the advanced module. I'm not going to be looking at the right-hand synth today at all, so I've basically just shrunk it so that you can see the tracks in the background and maintain some context of what's going on here. Never forget that this is an effects unit. It's not an instrument in its own right. If I press keys on the keyboard, you hear the underlying drums. You don't see any keys being pressed on the keyboard. It's not in MIDI input receive mode, which means the keyboard on and keyboard gate pins are pointless in effects unit mode. They simply don't do anything. We're going to have to find another way to interact with this synth, which I'll show you shortly. Okay, so we've got 4 modules to look at today. The first one that I'm going to look at is the envelope follower. Now, envelope followers are a curious concept. What they basically do, imagine a circuit that listens to an audio signal. Now imagine an audio signal that starts off silent, gets loud over a period of time, stays loud for a while, and then tails away. What I've just drawn there is an envelope. If you listen to the volume of some audio and you basically draw how loud that thing is, you've recreated the envelope from the audio perspective. You don't know what it is. You can't see the envelope that's generated this signal in the first place, but you can infer the shape of the envelope by the amplitude graph. Now, that's exactly what an envelope follower does. It listens for an incoming signal and draws an envelope corresponding to the relative volume or amplitude of that signal. That is now a control voltage that can be applied somewhere else in the circuit. So if I plug the envelope follower into the filter circuit, let's have a look in the advanced matrix. Here's our envelope follower. Connect that to the filter cutoff. Now the envelope follower is going to listen for these drum beats. Now drum beats have a very sharp attack and a very fast release. So they've got a very unusual kind of peculiar, it's almost all transient. So what we're going to get is these spikes, these control voltage spikes. Now imagine applying that control voltage spike to the filter oscillator. What are we going to get? At the moment, complete dullness because the attack and release of the envelope follower are turned down fully, which means that it's not having an opportunity to spend any time drawing this envelope. Now what I'm going to say is increase the attack time So what it's now doing over this 125 milliseconds of attack period is it's basically kind of plotting this envelope in the background, figuring out what the shape of the curve is going to be. When we receive that signal, that incoming drum signal, as this sharp spike, the transient sharp spike of the drum hit, the envelope follower identifies that and turns it into a usable curve. Rather than it being this instantaneous hit, it's actually spending 125 milliseconds drawing this graph. Each one of those 125 millisecond gradients is then being applied as a control voltage to the filter frequency cutoff, turning it up every time there's a drum hit. Just get it into a slightly more usable range. Frequency was a bit low. Now you can quite clearly hear those spikes, and it's basically doing all of that work off the incoming audio signal. It has no idea about any MIDI notes or what's being played. It's listening to audio, and then it's interpreting that audio into a control voltage. Now the release knob on the envelope follower is a bit of a mystery to me. It seems to me to be effectively an attenuation control. In the manual it says this is what happens when the release cycle of the audio signal is detected. In other words, when it's getting quieter. But what I can quite clearly hear is an attenuation, a pulling down of the control voltage. It seems that we're operating on a bipolar scale, and the release is operating in a negative domain. So if I turn the release up, you'll hear the filter oscillator cutoff get pulled down really, really low. I just have to turn the volume down there, it was a little bit loud. Those sub sounds are really hitting OBS pretty hard. So that's the tail end of the envelope being generated by the envelope follower. Can you hear those? They're really quite subby. All of that energy is going on down in the lower frequency range. So I think this release knob is basically acting as an inverter or an attenuation of the envelope follower. So as the sound is tailing away, it's pulling the frequency down, it's reducing the control voltage or sending it negative to the filter oscillator. Now let's jump over to the other instrument track. I've got a synth set up here. Got an instance of Omnisphere here generating a really simple synth tone. Very straightforward indeed. Same kind of thing. Bring the Xils 4 in. Initially, we're not going to hear anything at all because we're not patched in. So we'll connect the input to the filter and the filter to the output. And we'll just hear that synth now. So that's now traveling through the filter oscillator. Now let's apply the envelope follower to a synthesizer sound. So again, I'm going to turn the attack up. I'll leave the release alone because that's just confusing matters. We'll just deal with attack for now. So a similar kind of thing, 150 milliseconds. Firstly, with no envelope follower applied, I've not connected the pin yet. Now we'll connect the pin. So if I hold the key down, the envelope follower's got no work to do now. It's basically just a constant signal. But every time it detects that incoming envelope, it's basically using it as a volume slider to turn up the control voltage on the filter oscillator. So yeah, the best way to think about it is an implied envelope. It doesn't know what's going on. It can't do anything with this audio signal until it analyzes it. And when it hears it, it's inferring the amplitude curve from the incoming signal. Let's head back over to our drum track. And I'm going to disengage the envelope follower. And this is the reason I started with the envelope follower rather than the transient follower. So even though it only says the word transient here, just realize there's an E missing off envelope. This is a transient follower. It's basically doing exactly the same job as the envelope follower with an instantaneous attack. The moment it detects a transient on the incoming audio signal, it's going to do something. The difference with the transient follower is that you can adjust the sensitivity of the transient detection. This little grid over here is your sensitivity grid. At the top, the transient detection is the most sensitive. It's going to basically find the most transients in the incoming sound. At the bottom, the least. On the right-hand side, it's going to have very fast transient detection. It's going to be able to discriminate between different quickly occurring transients. And on the left-hand side, it's going to be the slowest. So over in the top right-hand corner, this is the fastest, most sensitive method of doing transient detection. What I'm now going to do is plumb the transient detector follower directly into the filter circuit, and you'll get a very similar effect to what we just heard. So now we've basically got effectively an attack of 0, and the transient follower is doing exactly the same job. It doesn't seem to have the same quirky release control as the envelope follower. This is a genuine release control as I would expect it to be. In other words, we have control voltage signal. The moment the transients happen, then it's an instantaneous thing. We immediately enter the release phase and our signal disappears. So that's why we get those sharp spikes of the filter cutoff. I'll get the drum beat going again, play with the release control a little bit, and you'll hear the length of the cutoff attenuation change as we mess with this release value. Here we go. So they're really fast, 44 milliseconds. The transients basically hitting, being identified. We're spiking up on the frequency cutoff and then pulling it down quickly. Now, if I turn this up too far, can you hear those ch-ch-ch? There's one. That's a cymbal or some sort of, ride or crash that has a loud, ongoing, constant signal. Now we have our sensitivity set up to maximum and fast detection. So it's finding lots of little transients in those kind of rattling cymbal crashes. Each one of those is triggering its own transient response. And so you're hearing if I reduce the sensitivity or the speed of detection, hopefully we should be able to get rid of some of those repeats. There we go. Oh, it's still doing a little bit of it. So it's just a case of messing around with this sensitivity. You need to teach it what to listen for. How intense do these transients have to be over the background sound? A transient is something that's, it's an instantaneous moment of sound where something gets really loud. Drums are the classic example. How intense do those spikes have to be? And how quickly, how often do you do your transient detection? And that's what you're messing with in that little pad. And by bringing the dot to where I've got it now, we've basically got to the point where it's really doing a pretty good job of identifying all of the transients in that drum track, and then it can do something with them. At the moment, I'm just sending it into the filter cutoff, which is a nice simple example. But we have a brand new control voltage here that we can send anywhere we want. But that's not all we can do with the transient follower, because it can be used to detect audio signals. It can then turn those audio inputs, those transients, into triggers that can be used to fire other components in the synthesizer. So what I'm going to do is open my keyboard matrix, which is completely blank. We're not taking any input from the keyboard. This is an effects unit. But what we can do is interpret those transient hits from the transient follower as triggers, and we can use those to go to the trapezoid. What this means is that I can now reintroduce the concept of envelopes. At the moment, this effects unit is in constant analysis mode. Anything it receives on the incoming channel is going to be directed straight to the output. Well, we can intercept that, filter into the envelope, envelope to the output. I'll turn this filter modulation off just to make it absolutely clear what's going on here now. The only way you're going to hear sound is if the transient follower allows the signal to get through this envelope, because nothing else is opening the envelope. Let's press play and see what we get. So even though it sounds very similar to the last case, this is a completely different audio route. Now all of those transients are being used to open the envelope. At the moment we're in ADSR mode, and that's allowing the signal to flow through, which means the release control on my envelope ADSR is now available for use. Let's reintroduce, let's make that transient follower do two jobs, because we'll send it to the filter as well, the filter cutoff. So now we're getting the frequency spikes on the cutoff, and we're also controlling the opening of the envelope, triggering of the envelope to allow us to hear the sound. Now there's no equivalent common sense to be made of this over on the synthesizer world. If you think about the synthesizer, it's like effectively a pad, pressing a note, and then you're just getting a long, slow, evolving thing. So there's nothing for transients to hang off. There would be very little value in having a transient trigger on a basic synthesizer sound, something that isn't fundamentally oriented around transients, because there's just no opportunity to open that gate. So what we've done here is we've really diverged between the worlds of rhythm and melodic sounds. This is primarily a rhythmic technique that you're going to want to use to hang off your drum beats or whatever. I've cleared the matrix down so that we've got a pure route through from the filter circuit straight to the outside world, so I'm no longer involving any transient triggers. Let's have a look at the gate module next. So this is going to be a more advanced method of doing what we did with the ADSR. When I adjusted the release knob, I was able to control the length of each of those sounds, because basically the sustain, there is no concept of a sustain with a transient. It's a momentary hit, and then the release is controlling how long we hear each one of those signals for. We've got a more advanced concept of that with the gate, whereby we have an opening or input threshold. Once an audio signal reaches this level, the gate opens. It takes the attack amount of time to open. While it's open, audio can flow through. The signal is going to get through, the gate is open. At some point, the audio signal is going to drop below a closing threshold. It's going to get sufficiently quiet that the gate closes again, and it's going to take this amount of time, the release knob, to actually close. So we've got a threshold on the input. We're going to basically ignore any signals until it gets this loud. Then we're going to take an amount of time opening the gate. We're going to hold the gate open until the signal drops below a certain level, and then we'll take a period of time closing the gate. The gate level is going to determine how much control the gate has over this process. At the moment it's at 0, so when I press play you'll hear the signal flowing through the synthesizer without any effect. As I increase the gate level, basically I'll start playing with some of these controls and you'll hear the gate start to open and basically clamp down on the sound. Here we go. So at around this threshold, the snare's still loud enough to get through. Some of those toms are loud enough to get through, but the hats aren't. They're not passing the threshold. As I keep increasing this, as I increasing this threshold, we're going to throw away more and more sounds, and only the loudest ones will get through. If I turn the level up, the gate level up even higher, we're getting more and more brutal all the time. Now it's releasing, it's letting very little signal through the gate. If I pull the release down, the amount of time that the gate is open is going to get shorter and shorter. So you can create really snappy rhythm effects with sensitive control of these gate levels. At the moment I've not done anything with closing threshold, because Basically, most of these drum sounds are reducing to silence anyway, so the closing threshold doesn't have very much work to do here. Primarily with the other controls, you want a really fast attack so the gate can leap into action as soon as it gets some signal. It wants to let the signal through. And basically we control how much we let through with these controls. Oh, just let a little hat through there. This is the only module in the synthesizer that's dedicated to these input channels. There's no concept, this gate has no other value other than when used as an effects unit. You see it's not even part of the matrices. The transient follower, envelope follower and pitch tracker are all in the advanced matrix, but the gate isn't. This is its only job. Just as with the transient follower, there's nothing much for the gate to do on the synth track, so I won't jump over there. That's really not its task. It's all about processing rhythms, really. On the other hand, the final component, the pitch tracker, is all about synth sounds and doesn't really have much to do in the concept of rhythm, because now we're going to try to identify pitch in the incoming signal, and for that we need a synthesizer. So we'll jump back over to our synth-based FX module over here. Let's get rid of everything so that we've just got nice and clean input through the filter and off to the outside world. There's our synth sound. Now the pitch tracker is capable of listening to that audio signal and generating a corresponding control voltage. I'm going to show you a simple use case to start with, and then we'll have a look at a more advanced one. For starters, I'm just going to tie the pitch tracker into the filter cutoff in the same way that we did with the other modules earlier. So I've connected the pitch tracker to the filter module, and now when I press keys, it's basically going to identify the underlying pitch and send different levels of control voltage to the filter cutoff depending on how low or high the pitch of the sound that I play. You're still hearing the underlying synthesizer, just with different filter cutoff amounts applied. And those kind of warbling sounds and all of that modulation is coming from the pitch tracker. If I take the pitch tracker away, the underlying sound is much flatter, much plainer. And there's the pitch tracker coming in. You specify the range over which the pitch tracker can identify pitches with the low frequency and the high frequency. The closer together you have these controls, the more accurate the pitch tracker is going to be. But we're not really going to be able to identify that level of discrimination if we stick with the original synthesizer sound. So this is where we're going to basically decouple the synthesizer and just use its pitch. Now bear in mind at the moment we have no envelope control over this synthesizer, so what I'm about to do now is going to effectively generate a constant tone, because the demonstration that I'm going to do is to use the pitch tracker to modulate the pitch of oscillator 1. So we're now going to start using the synthesizer's own oscillators again, which we haven't done up until now. I'm going to turn the sawtooth oscillator of oscillator 1 down and then plug it into the filter. So here's our constant tone because there's no envelope connected. Get that to a reasonable level. So here's my incoming signal, which I'm going to take away. So now I'm playing notes on the keyboard, but obviously there's just a constant oscillator pitch going through the system, so there's no pitch change being made. Now I'm going to connect the pitch track to oscillator 1 frequency. Pitch just changed. You can't see the keys on the keyboard, on the virtual keyboard. I am playing different keys on the keyboard here. So I've just played the lowest C, the C1, and now I'll play a C3. There you go. And there's the pitch tracker identifying the tone, or trying to. Let's turn it down a little bit. Let's turn it down a little bit, shall we? Okay, buzzing bees or what? Right, I was in danger of losing my mind then. I just had to turn it off for a moment. I've had a fiddle around with these controls so that I can get something, now that we're up and running with this synthesizer sound in the background. I've adjusted the pitch tracker to basically an extent that it's going to allow me to demonstrate something useful. So just to recap, here's my synth sound. We're hearing that because I bypassed this entire effects unit. Now I'll re-engage the effects unit with no synthesizer sound incoming. The pitch tracker still hears this incoming FX, so you don't connect this via a pin. This is similar to the gate. These two are basically constantly listening for the incoming audio. So this pitch tracker is now listening to every key that I play on the synthesizer. If I turn the oscillator back up again and play some notes, that's a C that I just played there. It's kind of roughly approximating a C. Let's go up an octave. Now down to a G. So it's listening to the audio and interpreting the pitch of this audio from the notes that I play. This effects unit has no MIDI input at the moment. These keyboard presses that I'm making, that's not what's generating these control voltages. If I open the instance of the synthesizer in the background, I'll just spam the C3 for a moment, change the pitch of the outgoing signal, and you can see that the pitch tracker is genuinely tracking what's coming out as the audio. It also seems to have some sort of sample and hold effect. The last audio it identifies. I'm not pressing any keys at the moment, and yet if I turn it back up, it's going to carry on maintaining that signal. So it seems to have some sort of locking mechanism. The last time it hears an audio signal, it's going to generate a control voltage of that amount. In this particular case, that control voltage is then being sent into oscillator 1's frequency. And so it's approximating something kind of in the ballpark of a pitched instrument that's being inferred from another audio signal from the original instance of Omnisphere in the background. Just press the B there. So it's not done a bad job. If I turn snap on, it's going to basically turn it into a glissando effect. So it's now going to step back in a portamento way down to the low C that I'm about to press now. There you go, and you can hear that glissando effect. If I increase the quality, it slows that slew down. So this is basically like the response time on your portamento. But quality also determines the integrity, the ability of the unit to be able to analyze that audio signal in the background. If I turn the quality down low enough, you'll hear it start to stutter and lose its ability to identify the pitch. Let's have a go at that. There we go. So I needed to send it a new audio signal there so that it could basically like refresh its buffer. And you can see it just going up through notes of the octave here. And eventually press F and then G, and I'll just start doing F to G. There we go. And its quality definitely improves. Around between 12 o'clock and 3 o'clock, it gets to the point where it's consistently able to identify those things. Go back to a smooth portamento. There we go. And this low frequency and high frequency is the maximum and minimum ranges that we'll travel between. So if I set it over a fairly small range, now all of the notes that I play will be within that range. So if I play the highest note on my keyboard, it's going to be an A sharp, and the lowest note on my keyboard is only a couple of semitones lower. So it doesn't matter really what note I press. They've all got different control voltages that are coming from the original synthesizer in the background. For the love of God, stop. But because I've set this range very narrow, it's basically interpreting that entire audio signal range into a much compressed space. the weirdest module I think I've ever seen in any synthesizer. Getting my head around this thing has been an absolute journey, I can tell you. But I can understand, it's very cool to be able to analyze an incoming audio signal, and then do something with it, in the control voltage matrix. But, poof, blimey. Yeah, it's one of the outlier modules you'll come across. Okay, that'll do us for today. Boy, do I need a cup of tea. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Please hit like if you did. I'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.